Nickbot over on YouTube says the Flyers are doing Flyer things. Fans think a win streak means playoffs when it was a bad play from the other team. Very excited for the draft. Because this has now become a true focal point of our show, it's become something that is something that I think we all look forward to each and every episode. I think on Wednesday, the Flyers were 8th in the lottery standings. I think they were 8th. I'm pretty sure they were 8th. By virtue of losing last night in overtime, the Flyers are now 7th. All right, so let's take a goosey gander at the lottery standings right now. Now, keep in mind, and we've been through this a few times, the top 2 spots in the draft are determined via lottery. Everything else just goes by the reverse chronological order. It goes by reverse order of fewest points, right? So again, if you were to finish the season in 7th and you were to get leapfrogged by 2 of the teams below you, the worst the Flyers would be able to pick at would be 9th, which is okay. I mean, it's not anything that I think anybody would get like totally hyped about, but still. 9th pick in the draft, better than 14th. Okay. Now, because Pittsburgh picked up the win, Flyers pick up a point. That gap between the teams goes from 4 to 3. But as you can see here once again, and I've been pretty consistent about this, I just think that at this point, Nashville is probably going to continue to fall. They're 3-7-0 in their last 10 games. I think it's more likely than not that San Jose, Chicago, and Nashville represent your bottom 3 teams this season. I don't see any of them getting hot. So then you're looking in this range, this realistically 4 to 15 range. You're looking at teams that are separated by 8 points, from 54 with Seattle in 60 games to 62 points with a bunch of these teams, including St. Louis, Boston, Ottawa, the Rangers. So it's going to be close. And as I've been consistent, and I will continue to be consistent in saying, while many scouts believe that the 5th pick through 15th or 18th are virtually the same quality of player, which on one hand is good and on another maybe is a little bit disappointing, I'd rather have my choice of, let's say, that group of 10 or 12 players than get one of the final 3 remaining. So, with all of that in mind, we are going to do the other thing that we like to do here as we get excited for what could potentially happen with your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers. Let's run the lottery. Let's just see. Maybe will it be a fantastic Friday, or is it going to just be like a failure Friday? All right, here we go. We only do this once an episode. The winner here, San Jose. Oh, we don't like this. We don't like this. Anaheim jumps 6 spots, which would push the Flyers down to 8th. Now, again, a lot of games remain. The Flyers have 22 games remaining. They have an absolutely brutal stretch in March. The 6-1 win over Pittsburgh at home a few nights ago was a great win, especially if you're a big rivalry fan. And especially if you really hate the Pittsburgh Penguins still, even though I think a lot of the fire of that rivalry has essentially gone away. If you're one of the people who gets incredibly hyped for that game, then that was a big win, at least in your mind. The game against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh was disappointing on a few levels. And probably the most disappointing of all is that you had a 3-0 lead. And you allowed that Pittsburgh team to get back into it, ultimately to force overtime. And then the final goal that's scored by Malkin, I said earlier, it was a patient play, and it was a clutch play, and it's one of the best to do it in recent memory. He's up to, I think, 510 career goals. Malkin just blows one past Ersson, blocker's side. Can't do anything about it. That goal falls in large part on both Travis Konechny and Matvei Michkov, who blew their coverages, and it was just not a great goal to give up in OT. Now, the part of me that says, hey, good, you want the loss, don't end up with another 4-point swing. If you're in that place that I am, you go, all right, overtime, loss, fine. You don't like picking up the point. If you're somebody who likes the idea of moral victories, I guess there's a bit of a moral victory in that win. But I would say that overall, or in that loss, overall, it's okay. Like, you walk away from that 2-game set. You end up with 3 points. Pittsburgh ends up with 2. The gap between you in the lottery spots hasn't gotten that bad. So we'll see. Sean C. says, like I said, I'm more pissed about the non-answer to Hathaway being knocked out on the ice, and that damn loser point doesn't help. I wish they would have lost 2 minutes earlier. Well, sure, because that would have made up the gap that you created by the regulation win in Philly. KW1323 says, will Michkov get serious Rookie of the Year consideration, or has it already been determined that Celebrini will win it? I think that it's a very good likelihood Celebrini is going to win it no matter what. The interesting thing here is that Celebrini missed more games but has played more minutes overall this season than Michkov. So, that'll be one thing that I'm sure they're going to, the voters, will probably hold over Michkov, which they shouldn't. I mean, it's a genuinely stupid thing to hold over Mishkov's head. I am of the opinion right now that they're going to look at games played, and they, for some reason, are going to try to use that against Matvei Michkov. And it doesn't make any sense. Realistically, if you're trying to come up with how do you determine who wins Rookie of the Year, who wins the Calder Trophy, for me, I look at point production. And I ultimately probably would, to some extent, look at games played and minutes played. And it's kind of hard to argue the fact that, John Tortorella multiple times this season has sat Matvei Michkov, has scratched him from games, has removed him from games, has limited his ice time. I mean, even if you think about last night, there's an opportunity in that game potentially for Matvei Michkov to get himself more minutes. I think he ended up playing 14 minutes. And I know that it was part of a very big Twitter debate, and this is just what happens now with Michkov and when it comes to Tortorella. But from my vantage point, I go, in the midst of this rebuild and in the midst of knowing what this team is supposed to be, I would like to just have Matvei Michkov kind of figure it out as a player. I'd much rather see Matvei Michkov become a guy who's allowed to kind of work through the growing pains. And when you look at that overtime goal and you look at what ultimately probably cost them the game in overtime, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's crazy to say that the Flyers probably would have been better off if they had just allowed Michkov to play more minutes. And sure, he blows a coverage in overtime. There's no debating it. And yet, it is a rebuild. And I'd rather that guy kind of figure things out in a season that doesn't really matter, rather than, I don't know, the idea that I guess Tortorella is trying to instill good values in the player, good responsibility in the player, there is truth to that. And at the same time, I sit back and say, what's best for the team and what's best for Matvei Michkov long term? Torts might be right. And at the same time, I've been pretty consistent about saying this. I think next year the team has a good chance of making the playoffs. And if that's the case, I don't know if you want him going through those kind of growing pains next year. But that's where I'm at. Maybe I'm crazy. I could be. I don't think I am, but I could be crazy.